Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Mr. Official, and today we're discussing an issue in officiating which is right in front of your eyes, but which you might not have noticed: the lack of women in reffing. I interviewed Grace Dastous, Emily Heislein, Ashley Dolan, Laura Ivy, and Erin Mallory to get their opinions, which were faithfully edited into this video. They identified 5 major reasons for the lack of women in the referee corps. Here's what they said. Many of the women who have become renowned, well-respected elite players have had to overcome many obstacles male players have not experienced. Becoming a respected official often requires overcoming those same barriers as well as new ones. Starting from scratch after becoming one of the top players in your position is an unappealing notion at best.
I feel like I have overcome a lot of obstacles when it comes to playing and like getting respect on the field, to then try to tackle that problem out like in a whole different like I think playing and then reffing is a whole different category. To try to approach that and do that in reffing seems kind of overwhelming to also take on. So I felt like I took more of the playing side instead of the reffing side.
I feel like I am first a player and a ref second. I go to tournaments to play, and so most of my energy is really spent on focusing on winning, getting better, improving as I play. And so for me, an HR, and LAR to less of extent, but more in HR is more like a full-time job to me. Like if I'm not going to give 110% of that at a tournament, I don't feel I should be doing it. ARing is something like, I play beaters, so it's a lot easier for me, I feel like, to AR. Just naturally between games, I can just jump in and AR and I feel comfortable at it.
I think there are a lot of male players that are really great players and can also be really great refs. I can't think off the top of my head of like a really strong female player that is also a really strong female ref. And I think it's part of that. You kind of see all these obstacles in playing, and then you have to kind of tackle all these obstacles in reffing at the same time. So
Overcoming barriers to being respected as a top-tier player in the Quidditch community and as a referee isn't something male player referees have had to do. In fact, women are often subjected to at least twice as much doubt on their playing skills, and then again on their refereeing skills.
Like people will just on the sidelines too, like watch for this, watch for that, or you're not even watching the snitch. And to me, that would give me so much, you're not even watching beaters. That would give me so much anxiety, not only from getting that from the players, but I think also from the crowd too. So it's all of these people kind of putting doubt on your skills, which, like I've said, is something that I've done in playing. So it's like a whole separate thing.
What can be done about this? Well, it really boils down to one thing, which is that players, spectators, coaches, and staff need to be aware of how their actions are perceived. When a disagreement arises with a referee, be aware of how your actions can be perceived by the referee and by other people in the area. For example, in this shot, you can see a situation where I am surrounded by players from one team who are disagreeing with a call. As a 6'4", 300-pound white guy, this is not intimidating to me. But if I was a much smaller person, this would be a very intimidating sight to be surrounded by this many players. And if I was a new ref, that intimidation would be compounded. That anxiety would cause me not to want to ref again. If you want more refs, you have to treat your referees with respect. Now, to be clear, I'm not asking that you always agree with every call a female ref says. And I'm going to let Grace here explain why.
That doesn't mean to say that you need to accept everything that a female ref is saying, just like you don't need to accept everything that a male ref is saying. But I think people need to be more cognizant.
Roster and team structuring around preconceived gender notions limit the number of women whose teams keep them consistently involved in the sport. The current gender rule in USQ declares that up to 4 players of the same gender can be on the pitch at the same time during the secret floor. Once the secret floor has expired, that limit increases to 5 players. USQ also limits roster sizes to up to 21 players. All too often, this leads to one specific roster breakdown when viewed from a gender perspective.
It could be one that there is just so much lack of women in the sport, it seems like nowadays. Like, I know at Maryland, we really tried to build up having more females and everything on the team. But I noticed, like, throughout the years, you bring your 21 people, kind of like your 3 lines. So that would mean 6 women on the team. And so eventually we kind of had our 6 who always came to tournaments, and all the other females that would come to practice and stuff kind of stopped coming, because if they're never going to make the team, why bother playing?
Which a lot of female players are forced to play a lot of the game because they don't have a lot of female players, or like, you know what I mean? If you only have 2 female players on your team and you require them to ref 10 games, like that's a whole nother exhausting thing that they need to do, which is really hard.
So like, if a lot of teams are like that, and let's say 1 or 2 people on each team are a ref, because I very strongly believe that every team shouldn't be required to have a ref, because I think it very much depends on a personality type to be a ref. Then naturally the numbers are going to be lower if there are just so many less females in the sport, I think.
Preconceived notions of gender don't just affect playing time, but can also affect a team's organizational structure.
Harder for like women to have that voice on the field, because it's kind of their roles a lot of times, even just on the team, are kind of downplayed, and they're not as like the star, like listen to this person. So going from not really having that role in the team to being a ref, I think makes it a harder jump, because you're not used to asserting yourself and being able to get everyone to listen to you, just because you're not given that opportunity as often.
So what can you do about this? 3 examples of initiatives which have been taken to address the concerns laid out so far are the IQA's Gender Maximum Rule, the MLQ Kilman Clause, and the Boston Pandas Roster Initiative. The IQA Gender Maximum Rule states that a team may not have more than 4 players who identify as the same gender in play at the same time at any time. That includes once the secret floor has expired. The MLQ Kilman Clause states that every team must have at least 1 applicant for head coach or assistant coach, hire at least 1 person for head coach or assistant coach, or have a pre-existing head coach or assistant coach that is, quote, a gender minority player for the upcoming season. And the Boston Pandas state that they will be competing strictly in a 3-3 set. Now, all 3 of these initiatives work to increase the number of women and people outside the binary competing and participating, and the more participation there are from those groups, the more likely it is they can move over to the officiating side and help improve officiating as a whole. Traditional gender roles outside of a team might be harder to tackle, but they have a palpable impact on the women in our sport who might become referees.
For me, I think there's a little bit of back history to just growing up as a woman in U.S. society. For me, that meant growing up in like my experience, women were like held to certain standards. Like we were supposed to be more mature. We were supposed to know better, like by adults. Adults would be like, you're supposed to know better. Like boys will be boys. Like they're just goofing around, but you should know better. You're more mature. And so we didn't really get a grace period to learn from our mistakes. We were kind of made to feel bad for making mistakes. And to me, this hurts men just as much as it hurts women. It basically tells men they're not mature enough. They don't have the emotional capacity to make good choices, which is just as stupid. But it also hurts women because we didn't get the chance to like feel comfortable learning from our mistakes and get a pass to like be kids and be like, oh yeah, we're just messing around, we're learning. And so there's kind of this like underlying feeling of, if I made a mistake, this is devaluing me as a person. I messed up on like a personal level. And also when it comes to sports, especially a full contact sport, which women have less experience playing because we were not encouraged growing up to play full contact sports, we feel less confident in our knowledge of it. And as a result, when we make a mistake, we feel like we don't think like, oh, I made a mistake, it's not a big deal. We think like, oh, we just proved that women know less about this sport. Like we almost take it on as like, I just represented my gender in what I just did instead of it being personal. So to me, that puts a much higher burden on reffing for women than it does on males players, in my opinion.
The differences in upbringings cause different reactions when a referee makes a mistake.
I feel like just that upbringing of being told that by adults, I don't think it's conscious, really. Like, right. I think it's like, I've talked to like my guy friends when they ref and they're like, oh yeah, I messed up that call. And I mean, maybe it does bother them more than they're letting on, but they seem a little more like nonchalant about it, like, oh yeah, I personally messed up and, you know, I'll do better next time. But with a lot of women, I can just kind of see like just all of their confidence drain when someone's like, that's not what happened. And they're like, oh my God.
Ashley conducted an informal survey to gauge how pervasive this phenomenon is, and these were her results.
The majority comments I put out a like, what's your thought about reffing as a gender minority? I had 3 people vote that they like, I have reffed and I feel like somewhat comfortable at it. Only 1 person said that they reffed and they felt completely comfortable and confident at it. 2 people said that they felt less comfortable than their male counterparts. 2 people said they have not reffed because they're afraid of making a mistake. 1 person said, I have reffed but feel men's voices are prioritized in the pitch and uncomfortable speaking up about it.
So, what can you do about it?
So kind of like knowing that people will default to people that appear confident and appear knowledgeable, which is like natural. If someone clearly seems like they know more, you're going to want to turn to them, but you're not really thinking about the effects of that on a newer ref, especially female and GNC refs. So my advice for that situation would be, if you're a male ref and someone's coming to you, but you were further away from it, be like, oh, actually so-and-so, and point out the ref that was closer, closer, we should ask her. Kind of facilitate that so women who are less confident speaking up don't feel like, oh, like they don't just sit there like, oh, okay, like I don't want to intervene and be wrong, or I don't want to intervene and like be treated differently or something. So having a male step in and point out like that person was actually closer, I think could really help move that along, especially for newer reps.
Refs take a lot of abuse, but it is so much worse than you think. If you don't believe me, here is a small sample of stories.
I've been almost like beat up once, I guess. I was really out of it to know that I was going to get beat up, but I think it was like an Elite 8 game or something at at Nationals. I want to say my senior year of college. So I was still playing for BU at the time. And I was the LAR. I didn't know the head ref. I'd never worked with him before. But I think he was pretty decent. He just wasn't watching the beater game much. So he just told us, like, watch the beater game. Like, that's your goal. And especially because it was Texas A&M versus Maryland. And in the end, like, when the snitch came on pitch, they stuck all the ARs and LARs on the snitch. I don't even know if anyone was HR was like only kind of watching a quaffle game at that point. And I just remember like someone threw a beat and it missed, but then Maryland pulled the snitch and Texas A&M flipped. And they were like, everyone was screaming at us. And I was just really tired because I'd been playing before that. And then I think I had to go to another game after that. So I didn't even really register what was going on with this player, but she like came up to me like screaming at me. And Curtis, I just remember had to get in between the two of us because I guess to him it looked like she was going to like beat me up. And I just was out of it and didn't notice it. And like after the fact, he's like, she was going to punch you. I'm like, oh, thank you.
There was one game my first year reffing. It was one of the last games of the season, and it was a JV game. And it was between the 2 lowest teams, like there were, and it's their JV teams, they're bad teams. But man, were the coaches into it, were the fans into it. And we got heckled to no end, to the point that when the game was over, the 3 refs, we actually had to hide in the locker room for an hour and a half before every fan left because fans were waiting at the exits for us to walk by.
Because I have been followed across a tournament before by a player who was upset with how I called a game. I was at Nationals. They followed me until I took off my ref shirt, revealed a QCB jersey, and walked up to Harry Greenhouse. They stopped following me at that point.
Now, sometimes you might find yourself getting hyped up during sports, and you might find yourself yelling at the refs. But you need to remember, it's not always all about you.
I don't do well when like people yell at me. And I know that like when I get mad, I sometimes yell at the ref, but you can imagine like having 10 male players yelling at a ref at the same time. Like I personally wouldn't be able to handle that. So that's why I like try to avoid it at all costs.
That I didn't want people just yelling at me. And I'm that one person that could be like, well, you decide the final, like, was the snitch caught? Was that actually a goal? You decide everything as the final call. And I didn't want that pressure on me. I didn't want to deal with a ton of other people yelling at me. I think it wouldn't have mattered who it was. I don't love confrontation. So anyone that's really yelling at me, I'm just like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, I'm just here to play a game. And that's also the aspect of some people take it so seriously. Like, I understand there's a serious side of it, but also like, it's a game. Like, you gotta calm down.
So what specific problems can be addressed to help reduce the turnover rate and help increase the participation of female and gender non-conforming referees?
On that, I think reffing, this should be acknowledged. Reffing in Quidditch, I think, is really rough on people, especially compared with other sports, because of the proximity to fans and refs. So like in other sports, fans oftentimes are like up in a stadium, they're up in a bench, and like hockey, baseball, football, they're up far away. So like there's overall a lot of noise, and maybe you can pick out an insult here or there, like people screaming at you, like, you know, they're saying bad stuff, but they're pretty like far away from you. It's kind of like a lot of chatter. In Quidditch, the fans sit like against the hard boundary, 2 feet from your face. And so you can hear everything they're saying. I refed a game with Bosnia Bosnia refed a game at Nationals last year. I think it was Texas A&M, and I think it was Michigan or Minnesota. I don't remember. They have gray jerseys, but it was their elimination game. It was like a really, really, really gritted match. Like they were, both teams wanted it so badly. And it was probably the worst game I've ever refed, not because of the players, because of the fans. The fans on the side just cursing us out. Like, I mean, literally like the C word, the B word, like anything you can think of, just cursing us out. And I think I was the only female ref. I think I was reffing with Ricky Nelson, CJ Jr., and Kyle Gian. And we were ARing, and I think Ricky was LARing. And I actually got a ton of respect from the A&M players and their speaking captain. And I have like kind of some tips on like why I think something that was a very, very heated game was able to still have a really respectful conversation with the players and the captains. And I think Grace was telling me, she's like, oh, I think it might have to do with the tone and the way you say things to players. That could be really helpful.
The fifth and final point is best described by Erin Mallory, the USQ Head Referee of the Year for the year 2015-2016, who also refereed the IQA Finals match at World Cup 2016 in Frankfurt, Germany that same year.
Yeah. And I think it's probably also like I'd be really curious to see how many women even in the sports, one, have a background in reffing, because most people probably don't, but that before they try and ref Quidditch. And then 2, how many of them have a sports background where that's what they did their whole life or whatever. Because I know at least when it started, when I was first starting playing Quidditch, a lot of people that I knew joined Quidditch and weren't necessarily sports people through high school or even at younger grade levels.
So when women are generally conditioned away from contact sports for most of their early life, the learning curve becomes much steeper towards understanding the rules well enough to officiate.
I also, just another reason why I haven't picked up the stripes. I like the wording of this question. The rule book seems very detailed and technical and overwhelming, and for me, I'm very visual, so like you can explain something to me 5 minutes auditory and I have really trouble understanding it. I really need to see it. So when like we have these conversations about rules on the forums, I just like I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about, so I'm just gonna like not listen, which is hard because It is very technical. It is very detailed based. So that's just also a personal thing. Like why I didn't take it up is that it seems like a lot of effort to learn the rules, and you have to learn the rules. You have to know it like the back of your hand. I feel like sometimes, well, I would need to learn it like the back of my hand to be able to make a decision and stick to it. Talking over the forms or talking over that rule book, whatever, is intimidating, or asking questions is intimidating, because I think some people assume that everyone should already know all of these things. So it makes it hard for people who are just learning.
And also when it comes to sports, especially a full contact sport, which women have less experience playing because we were not encouraged growing up to play full contact sports, we feel less confident in our knowledge of it. And as a result, when we make a mistake, we feel like, we don't think like, oh, I made a mistake, it's not a big deal. We think like, oh, we just proved that women know less about this sport. Like we almost take it on as like, I just represented my gender in what I just did, instead of it being personal. So to me, that puts a much higher burden on reffing for women than it does on males players, in my opinion.
Once you've learned the rules, however, you still might not be taken seriously by the players on the field or their coaches and captains.
And it's a very salient experience to think, I am in charge of this game, I am the head ref, I have taken the time to read the rule book from start to cover. The whole thing. All of it. I have taken all of my ref tests, I have practiced. You know, in college, you would remember this, sometimes I would choose to not practice and would ref our scrimmages so I could get more practice reffing. And then for me to go on the field and have some player who has read maybe 2 pages of the rule book, is not qualified to be a ref at all, is not even assistant ref qualified, come up to me and say, you don't know what you're saying, that's against the rules. No, in the back of my mind, every time that happens, I have the question, is this happening because I made the wrong call? Or is this happening because I'm female presenting? And for those of you watching this, if you have not met me in person, I'm tiny. I am all of 5'2". So I have always in the back of my head had 5'3", 5'2", 5'3". I'm being told I'm 5'3.5". I'm very small, and I'm female presenting, and I don't have a deep voice. And so every time I make a call and have that person charge out questioning it, in the back of my head, I'm always wondering, did I make the wrong call, or are they questioning it because I'm presenting as a female? And very often that is what it is. I can think of the times that people have tried to intimidate me into changing a call.
And once you've learned the rules and overcome self-doubt and doubt from the players, coaches, and captains on the field, your fellow crewmates might still pose an extra barrier to hurdle on your way to success as a referee.
The last point I think I got was player feedback. Was someone told me like, oh, I sometimes feel like I'm not trusted on the pitch, like just because I'm a newer ref. And so to that point, I was like, again, everything. I think my underlying points are always, it's not personal. Like nothing is personal. Even if it feels that way, it's not. And in my opinion, if this is a hot take for sure. But in my opinion, if all these people playing Quidditch are playing a full contact co-ed sport, to some extent, they know women are good at sports. Or they would just play any other sport where women and men are separated if they actually thought we were lesser people when it comes to like playing ability. So with that in mind, reffing this sport specifically, I don't think I have ever felt like a ref intentionally undermined me because I was a girl. Maybe undermined me because I was less experienced than another ref on the pitch. Maybe undermined me because they just felt like they had a better view on it than I did, even though I felt differently. But I've never felt like it was personal towards me. I never felt like they were like, no, it's because you're a girl, or no, it's because it's you specifically, Ashley, who I hate as I ref. It's usually just conflicting opinion, and it's just important to remember that like this isn't about you. The refs are trying to ref the game, you're trying to ref the game, and if you can remove your own personal like fears or concerns or insecurities from it, you are set up perfectly to like become a good ref.
Many of the stories and issues brought up are not unique to women in reffing, but they are often exacerbated when the official is a woman. I hope you have come away with some ideas about how you can change your own behavior to increase the number of female and gender non-conforming referees in this sport. If you did not come away with any of those kinds of strategies, I at least hope you are leaving with a sense of how to treat new referees so that turnover in the official corps is reduced. Remember, referees can't get better without practice, and practice takes time. So please, be patient with referees. And as always, thank you for watching.